Page 26. Authority should apply for assistance if he considers it necessary. Only in the event of the police being unable to enforce compliance would the Royal Navy be prepared to intervene. The application for naval assistance would be made by police and not by the Port Authority. I am to request you to state whether you concur with the procedure suggested. G. Grimwood. For Chief Secretary. To Chief Secretary. Secret. KG/169. January 3, 48. I am referring to your letter on the subject of the enforcement of any instructions issued by the General Manager PR under the provisions of the Defense Emergency Regulations, 1948, published in Palestine Gazette 164, Supplement No. 2. The procedure proposed is technically correct but in practice difficult. It would, for instance, be quite impracticable for a police launch to take efficient action against a vessel of some size, which, say, insisted on making for Tel Aviv port, in spite of being directed to Haifa by the General Manager Pell. Railway. Under the proposed procedure, unless and until the police had made an attempt to intercept such vessel, it would not be possible to state whether naval assistance was necessary, by which time it would in all probability be too late for effective action. It would therefore appear necessary for agreement to be reached, whereby the SP Haifa would be the deciding authority, as to whether enforcement of any order of the General Manager PR by the police is a practicable proposition, and that Commodore Palestine would be prepared to assist if so called upon to do. SGD Gray. IG. Copy to SP Haifa. From IG. Secret and Personal. To SP Haifa DSP Port Marine Division. KG/164. Copy to Commodore Palestine. March 48. Subject: enforcement of any instructions issued by the General Manager, Palestine Railways, under the provisions of Defense Emergency Regulations published in Palestine Gazette 164, Supplement No. 2. It has been decided that the enforcement of the law published in Supplement No. 2 of Defense Emergency Regulations published in Palestine Gazette No. 164 Supplement No. 2 of 1948 rests with the police. If police is unable to enforce the said law, application will be made to Commodore Palestine for assistance. If the Commodore will decide that law can be enforced without naval support, the matter will be referred to government. Through IG and in absence of the SP Haifa, this will be done by DSP Port Marine, personally by phone and immediately confirming by cipher. Liaison with naval authorities and port manager should always be on a friendly basis. SGD Reno. Personal Secretary to IG. *. British attempt to charge Jews with responsibility for violence. At the same time, in the United Nations, the British are making a concerted effort to involve the Jews on an equal plane with the Arabs in offensive violence in Palestine has been undertaken by the British. Thus, on January 21, 1948, the mandatory power told the Palestine Commission, as regards Arabs and Jews in Palestine, that elements on each side were engaged in attacking or in taking reprisals indistinguishable from attacks. This statement ignored the fact that only a month earlier, Creech Jones, Colonial Secretary, told the House of Commons on December 11, "There have been serious disturbances in Palestine since the United Nations decision was announced, due mainly to Arab incitement. The attempt to place blame on the Jews for the current violence was continued in the answers which the United Kingdom delegation gave to a series of questions asked by the 4 permanent members of the Security Council at an informal meeting on March 9. On March 12, the answer submitted in behalf of Sir Alexander Cadogan reveals the bias of the mandatory power. Question 6. To what extent are disorders inside Palestine due to participation by armed elements from outside Palestine? Inspector General. Page 27. Answer 6. The present series of disturbances began in December last, against a background of Jewish-inspired disorder, which had been going on for 2.5 years. The Arabs implicated in this series of disturbances were originally all Palestinians. Since then, both Palestinian and non-Palestinian Arabs have been engaged. Question 7. To what extent are disorders inside Palestine attributable to incitement to violence from outside Palestine? Answer 7. As far as the Palestine Arabs are concerned, their opposition to partition is spontaneous and universal. Inflammatory material has appeared in the press of the neighboring Arab countries, although the situation in this respect has recently improved. On the Jewish side, widespread propaganda has of course been conducted for some time, in the press of the United States and other countries by persons and organizations, inciting the Jewish community to violence and terrorism, principally against the mandatory power. Asked whether arms are flowing into Palestine, from outside sources to individuals or groups, unauthorized by the mandatory power to possess arms, the United Kingdom gave the following answer. Both Arabs and Jews in Palestine are now receiving illicit consignments of arms from outside sources. While the Palestine government have no exact knowledge of the quantity and description of arms possessed by either side, it is their opinion that the Jews are better armed than the Arabs. In this connection, it will be recalled that there have recently been instances of the seizure in the United States by United States authorities of large consignments of high explosives destined for Jewish organizations in Palestine. As regards the possibility which has been suggested of illicit importation of arms by aircraft landing in the desert, the Palestine government consider this unlikely. Such clandestine importation by air would, however, be easier for the Jews than for the Arabs, in view of the better facilities possessed by the former, for wireless communication and for distribution of arms after receipt. In response to a question as to what measures, military and civil, the British took to prevent the movement of hostile elements in Palestine, from outside Palestine, the British again tried to implicate the Jews, putting Jewish refugees seeking asylum on the same plane with armed Arab invaders. The principal points of entry by land are guarded by troops or police, but owing to the length of the frontier and the difficult nature of the terrain, it is impossible for frontier control to be 100% effective. As regards the sea frontier, the measures taken by the mandatory authorities to prevent the entry of Jewish illegal immigrants are well known. British mock Jewish belief in ability to withstand Arabs. While the British at Lake Success were distorting Jewish defense operations, British intelligence in Palestine was mocking Jewish capacity to withstand Arab assault. Thus, Intelligence Summary No. 68, 6th Airborne Division, says, "In this attitude can be seen the eager desire of the Jewish populace to convince themselves that the Arab forces are not well enough organized to carry out such an attack, Ben Yehuda Street disaster, in the heart of a heavily defended Jewish area. Jewish leaders are doing all they can to encourage this attitude, since they realize that Jewish morale, already seriously affected by the continuation of widespread Arab attack, would suffer a severe blow if the Jewish community were to believe that this attack could be carried out by Arabs. It is obviously to their advantage to foster the current Jewish belief that the Arabs are not technically capable of carrying out such a well-organized large-scale bomb attack in the Jewish area, and that in fact the Jews have nothing to fear from the Arabs, who can be adequately dealt with by the Haganah, but only from the British." Page 28. 11. British pro-Arab bias. Quite different is the attitude of the British to the Arabs. When asked by the United Nations whether the incursion of Arabs from neighboring countries represents a threat to international peace, the representative of the British government replied that his government would furnish all the facts available, and that the question of what constitutes a threat to the peace is for the Security Council to decide. This despite the fact that Creech Jones, anticipating trouble, told the House of Commons on December 11th. The Security Council may have to be evoked by the United Nations Commission if insurmountable difficulties occurred. And when the United Kingdom was asked to identify Arab personnel who have invaded Palestine, and to say whether the incursions were privately organized or are supported or encouraged by governments outside Palestine, the United Kingdom's answer on March 12th was an attempted exoneration of the Arabs, as the following indicates. Question 2. Has the mandatory power been able to identify personnel involved in such incursions? Answer 2. The information of the Palestine authorities regarding the origin of personnel involved in these incursions is derived from common knowledge available locally and from intelligence reports. As regards the character of these forces, they consist of irregular formations and not organized units of any national armed force. Question 3. Are these incursions privately organized by individuals or unofficial groups, or are they supported or encouraged by governments outside Palestine? Answer 3. HMG have no special information on this point, other than that given in the answer to question 2. British praise invaders. In fact, in February 1948, the British were finding praise for the Arab invaders, as a stabilizing element, offering the following proof as reported in the Fortnightly Intelligence newsletter number 61. In Nablus itself, the good behavior of the Arab invaders is having a stabilizing effect on the untrained and excitable Palestinians. A complaint was made to them recently that a lorry load of wheat had been stolen and 20 pounds robbed from the driver. In a very short time, the lorry and load had been returned and also the 20 pounds, together with a further 60 pounds which it was explained, was the fine imposed on the thief. A local villager, a spectator to this transaction, became a little vociferous. 2 hours later he was dead. For Arab train robbers have recently been dispatched to Syria by Fawzi Kawukji's men for execution. On March 10, 1948, Mr. Rhys Williams, deputy to Arthur Creech Jones in the British Colonial Office, replied to questions in the House of Commons as to whether he was aware a. that Fawzi Kawukji had established field headquarters in Palestine, b. whether he was aware that an Arab Liberation Force had declared martial law in Nablus, and c. what the government was proposing to do with respect to the incursion of Fawzi Kawukji and his followers. He said, "The High Commissioner has informed me of a local rumor that Fawzi Kawukji recently arrived in Palestine and is in the Samaria district. The developments referred to by my Han friend in the Nablus area appear to be a measure adopted by the leaders of Arab irregular forces to control their adherents and represent no attempt to replace or curtail the authority of the mandatory power in this area. The District Commission of the Samaria District." Page 29. Continues to reside in Nablus and his headquarters, and subdistrict officers are functioning normally. Palestinian members of the police force continue to perform their normal duties throughout the district under the supervision and control of British police officers. The district commissioner is in a position to call for the assistance of such military forces as he may require to assert the authority of the civil power. The security forces in Palestine will continue to protect members of either community who may be threatened with attack. British laud Arab propaganda. The 6th Airborne Division's Intelligence Summary Number 68, dated March 5, reported, 32. One of the best propaganda pamphlets yet to be produced in this country is an Arab pamphlet in English entitled, "For the Record," which is appearing in Haifa in increasing numbers. This pamphlet, also being distributed in the east and central sectors, is addressed to British soldiers, British police and British civilians, and gives details of British casualties caused by Jewish attacks during the past 2 years. These are not the victims of the so-called Jewish terrorists, the pamphlet states. They are the victims of the whole Jewish community. The Yishuv manned the terrorist gangs. The Yishuv protected, sheltered, and covered the terrorists. The Yishuv never cooperated with you in any way to stop the cowardly and barbarous deeds of its members. Keep this in mind, and keep in mind that the Arabs do not mean to attack you in the present conflict. The pamphlet is produced by the Arab Military Organization. This praise is offered for anti-Jewish propaganda, despite the fact that elsewhere in the same report, in discussing attacks against British personnel, British intelligence said, "It is to some extent surprising that attacks by dissident groups have not been more intensive, and it is believed that only strong action by the Haganah has prevented these attacks from becoming more numerous and widespread." Page 30. 12. British smear campaign shown by official records. The smear campaign conducted by the British against the Jews, since the Russian vote for partition in the Fall Assembly, has taken the form of charging communist infiltration with Jewish help into Palestine. A striking example of this was the charge which the British Foreign Office has allowed to be brought against the Jews in connection with the arrival in Palestine on January 1st of the Pan York and the Pan Crescent, 2 ships which sailed from Romania at the end of December carrying unauthorized Jewish immigrants. The British Foreign Office first permitted Mr. Herbert L. Matthews of the New York Times to charge that among the 15,000 immigrants were many communist agents, according to official British sources. The Times story dated London, January 31st, charged that 1,000 of the 15,000 immigrants spoke Russian, belonged to militant organizations. Some may have been non-Jews, and some had documents showing that they had served in the Soviet forces during World War II. The Times story said further that the immigrants on these vessels, and the number of others that sailed earlier from the Black Sea, were collected and sent toward Palestine with the knowledge and sometimes with the active connivance of the Soviet Union and its satellites, according to British officials. Later, the British Foreign Office said the same thing. When this story first appeared, Sir Godfrey Collins, commissioner for the Jewish immigration camps in Cyprus, said he had no information on the subject. Subsequently, on February 5, the British Foreign Office and Colonial Office queried Sir Godfrey, and a London dispatch to the Times on February 5 stated that Sir Godfrey had denied that he had stated that there were no communist agents aboard the ships. But a few days later, he repeated he had no information on communist agents. Actually, the top-secret report of the British representative Captain Linklater, who supervised the disembarkment of the refugees at Cyprus, said, in a preliminary report marked preliminary, only because of the size of the disembarkment dated January 2, 1948, if any large guerrilla groups of communists exist among the Russian speakers of this shipment, they are either still on board or else have arrived unarmed and without documentation. And Captain Linklater further explained, extremely large numbers of private documents related to individual points of the journey were taken from the Jews as they passed through the security screen at the reception camp, thereby showing a high breakdown in Jewish security. In addition to this, a number of passengers were willing to discuss details. No documents of outstanding importance were found. The Pan-York, Pan-Crescent story is revelatory of the lengths to which the British are prepared to go to smear the Jews. As soon as the boats had left Balkan waters, British officials sent a cable to their intelligence officers in Palestine, stating that the British surmise that communists are aboard. As a result, when the boats landed at Cyprus, for the first time in the history of Cyprus, baggage and documents of the refugees aboard the boats were searched. The flimsy evidence on which the charges against the Jews was based is revealed in the following partial record of Captain Linklater. Top secret. Preliminary report on the disembarkation from the Pan ships York and Crescent. General. 1. A peculiar disembarkation of some 15,300 Romanian Jews began at about 1,000 hours on. Page 31. January 1, 48 in Famagusta Harbor, when the two Panamanian vessels Pan-York and Crescent, which had been bound for the shores of Palestine, volunteered to discharge their passengers in Cyprus. 2. A detachment of this section is now operating in Famagusta, together with elements of RA-6 Erb Division for the purpose of assisting Field Security Cyprus, and troops under command of Cyprus District respectively, owing to the large number of Jews involved in this operation. 3. For this reason, our usual transshipment report has been produced as a preliminary report, which will be supplemented in due course by 299 FS section. We have been able to interrogate the passengers during the disembarkation and cursorily to examine documents carried by them. These documents have been handed to 299 FS section. Owing to an agreement with the Palmach leaders aboard both ships, however, our target team was not able to search the ships. This will be done at a later date. Passengers. 4. Rather like the previous illegal Jewish ships which sailed under Soviet auspices from a Bulgarian port, the Pan-York and Crescent contained a load drawn, almost entirely from Romania, and differed at least in this way from other illegal immigrant vessels which usually contain a mixed bag of European Jews. It is also noticeable yet once again that the passengers have apparently been evacuated from Romania by complete families including aged grandparents and very young children. In many cases, these families were split up between the two ships. 5. The highest proportion of children in the past year was contained in these ships, and the load was almost equally divided between men, women, and children, some of whom, however, may later be counted as adult by the Jewish agency representatives. The Pan-York alone carried 700 children under the age of 5. 6. The passengers were small businessmen, shopkeepers, professional lawyers, and doctors, and they carried large quantities of baggage. The Haganah authorities in Romania had allowed them to carry up to 20 kilos of baggage each, but there was no form of weight control, and this allowance was frequently exceeded. They were well dressed. Only very few turned up in rags and empty-handed. Most of them were small, rather fat and complacent. They nearly all spoke Romanian, Yiddish, and French and German. Those who did not speak Romanian spoke Russian and claimed to come from Bessarabia. Owing to the speed at which the operation had to be conducted, it was not possible to make a detailed examination of the Russian speakers. It was noticed, however, that they were not physically of a characteristically Russian type. 7. At the time of writing, less than 2,000 passengers have been disembarked, and it is not possible to forecast what will be found on the baggage of the remainder. But if what we have seen is to be considered on gallop lines, they carry no lethal weapons and very few old and rusty sheath knives and pocket knives. A few of the Palmach leaders still on board, the ships are openly carrying daggers in their belts. 8. Since both ships anchored voluntarily at Famagusta, it was to be expected that the passengers would disembark of their own accord. This expectation was fully realized, and a surprising and satisfactory degree of cooperation was received from the leaders who are controlling disembarkation under British direction. The organization in groups of 60 persons on board is excellent, and the Jews for once appear well-disciplined, thoroughly cheerful and reasonable. This is a remarkable and welcome change. 9. Nearly all the Palmach leaders and a proportion of the passengers are wearing green drab denim-type uniforms and Cossack-type fur hats. There is no snow on their boots. It is significant that the leaders have in fact come forward and are volunteering information as to the breakdown of passengers and the various administrative problems involved. Journey. 10. Most of the Jews on board appear to have filed their application for illegal passage into Palestine during the months of August to October 47, with Haganah and Jewish agency representatives, chiefly in Bucharest. They then, page 32, waited for the greater part in their own hometowns, where they were arranged into groups under leaders who kept contact with the illegal immigration authorities. At intervals, there were rumors that ships would be leaving from Constanza. Some months ago, numbers of them were called to Constanza itself in the usual manner for embarkation. That is to say, the leaders received most urgent cryptic telegrams, giving the time, place, and date of rendezvous. Finally, on the December 20th, the groups were called together for the last time, and a number of cattle wagon trains set out from all parts of Romania for Constanza, where they arrived on the 21st and the 22nd of December. 11. At this point, there was a delay until the evening of the December 23rd, when the Jews were informed that the plan had been altered. This delay, some explained with a wink, was for political reasons. But you know all about this, one added. It seems that the Russians were glad to be rid of them, in their own opinion, and that the delay was due to British intervention. On the morning of the December 24th, those convoys which had been waiting in and around Constanza left by train for the Bulgarian frontier. Some trainloads were diverted direct to the frontier from their original areas. On arrival at the Bulgarian frontier, there was a strict and thorough search by custom officials, when all the Jews' baggage was examined for contraband. We do not know whether any was found. There seems to have been some agreement between the Jewish organizations and the Bulgarian government, however, because there was in no case any kind of control on the Bulgarian side of the frontier. This may be explained perhaps by the fact that the Jews were confined to their trains within Bulgaria until the moment of embarkation. 15. The Pan York and Crescent sailed at about 12 hours on the December 26th from Burgos and arrived at Famagusta at about 7:30 hours on January 1, 48, after a quiet passage. A form of printed accommodation card was handed to each Jew on embarkation, showing bunk number and group number for feeding and general duties, which were taken strictly in organized rotation, together with a metal identity disc on a string. When the ships were near Cyprus, they were boarded by Royal Navy. The boarding was unopposed, and the boarding party was astonished to find the illegal crews still blatantly at their posts and still manning the ship. This is a complete departure from previous practice, and the attitude of the Jews allowed the naval party to go aboard wearing soft hats and without the use of truncheons. Disembarkation. 16. When the Pan York and Crescent dropped anchor in Famagusta Harbor, a Z-craft was sent out to each with a detachment of Royal Air 6 Airborne Division to take over from Royal Navy. The soldiers carried no weapons. Disembarkation began at 10:00 hours. Slowly, owing to the difficulty of moving women and children, complete with baggage, into two craft. It was considered advisable to allow each passenger to carry his own baggage at all times, thus obviating possible loss and damage, and it was on this understanding that the Jewish leaders agreed to interpret British embarkation orders, and to see that they were carried out. CRA 6 Airborne Division succeeded in obtaining the reluctant consent of Famagusta port authorities and ordered Pan York alongside the quay. She tied up at about 13:30 hours, thereby greatly facilitating communication with the ship and the disembarkation of passengers. 1,000 Jews were taken off Pan Crescent in Z-Craft to relieve congestion on board, and it is now intended to unload Pan York, which is the headquarters ship, first. At the time of writing, 2,000 Jews have been disembarked from Pan York. 17. Both ships are still extremely congested, however, and British personnel are not moving below decks, except to the engine room and certain key points on board. The Jews are in excellent spirits and eager to leave the ship. They are grinning and joking, and there is no trace whatsoever of hostility towards airborne soldiers conducting the disembarkation, who are behaving with usual tactful consideration, this time fortunately without the need for customary restraint and self-control. The quay resembles a normal peacetime passenger quay, except perhaps for the peculiar, easily recognizable and never to be forgotten stink arising from this. Page 33. Illegal Jewish ship as from all its predecessors. The Jews are being handed over to troops under the command of Cyprus District outside Famagusta docks, and searching is being carried out in the reception camps by a mixed collection of soldiers and military policemen. The admittance to the camps so far has been at a rate under 150 per hour, and the chief bottleneck seems to be a shortage of female searchers. This shortage is being in some degree overcome tomorrow, January 2nd, when voluntary emergency help in this direction will be provided by British officers' wives and other British female personnel. It is at the reception camps that Jewish documents are being removed by 299 FS-SEC assisted by a detachment of 317 Airborne FS Section. The ships. 18. The Pan York and Pan Crescent were originally built in about 1909 as banana boats. Their tonnage is in the region of 5,000 each. Both ships structurally are sound, although the paintwork is dirty. Both ships have been extensively modified for carrying large passenger loads, and apart from the usual bunks, lavatories, and ablution points, such luxuries as power-driven exhauster fans have been fitted in order to help evacuate some of the stench from below decks. The Pan Crescent was refitted in dry dock on April 1, 1947 at New York, and the compass was set presumably at the end of refitting in June of the same year. There were no anti-boarding devices. Conditions on board were less filthy than usual, and have favorable testimony of the high organization during the trip. 19. The food on board was plentiful during the journey, but there was a lack of variety in the Pan York during the last 3 days when the passengers were reduced to eating corned beef and biscuits, and naturally any of the spare rations which they themselves carried. Most of them seemed to have 1 or 2 tins of excellent American cocoa. The Pan Crescent was more lavishly supplied, and there are still stocks of such luxury items as grapefruit juice and orange juice on board. An interesting point is the continuous distribution below decks of drinking water. A party of Jews on permanent fatigue is making the rounds of the entire ship, distributing fresh water from a spotless bucket. 20. Both ships are well equipped with sickbays and medical stores, and there are some 45 doctors practicing on board assisted by about 150 nurses. Crew. 21. The crew of both ships is divided roughly speaking in the normal manner into 2 parts. First, those who for financial or idealistic reasons have signed on as key men without ever wishing or intending to remain in Palestine, and secondly, temporary members drawn from the Jewish passengers, who would normally accept a small financial benefit for, so to speak, working their passage. It is somewhat surprising that both the permanent and temporary crew have agreed to man the ships until they are offloaded and then to sail the ships, undamaged, to any port to be designated later by the British authorities. This agreement was reached apparently on the understanding that we would deport the permanent crew to their country of origin when the ships are finally handed over, unless they wish the temporary crew, who will be returned to the reception camps in Cyprus, without any discrimination to join the remainder of the passengers. 22. A great part of the permanent crew were obviously American, to judge from their features, dress, manner, and the broad Brooklyn accent to their indifferent Yiddish, with which they tried to disguise their country of origin. It is not known whether they intend to elect for a return to Cyprus, or whether they will declare their real nationality. A large number of navigation tables and books written in Italian, which we saw on the Pan Crescent, made us think that the captain or first mate of that ship might have been Italian. Propaganda. 23. There was no sign of former hysteria shown by earlier shipments of illegal Jews, and an absence of shouted slogans, nationalistic songs, and banners, except for one on the pan crescent in half English and half Hebrew characters, looking rather as if one half was a translation of. Page 34. The other. The English half said independence, while the Hebrew half, strangely enough, Jewish. Security. 24. In spite of the fact that organization on board was high, an extremely large number of private documents relating to individual points of the journey were taken from the Jews as they passed through the security screen at the reception camp, thereby showing a high breakdown in Jewish security. In addition to this, as number of passengers were willing to discuss details which we have given in this report. No documents of outstanding importance were found, however, and we believe that if such exist on board, the bearers are waiting until later on in the disembarkation in the hope in getting word back to the ships with details of the exact form of the search through which they will have to go. The generally friendly atmosphere of the disembarkation, however, and the consequent comparative volubility of the average Jew on board makes this load particularly interesting from the intelligence point of view and should produce valuable results. Documentation. 25. An analysis of documents carried and political parties on board will be produced in the final report by 299 FSSEC after scrutiny of documents held by them. Conditions in Romania. 29. Most of the passengers on the pan ships were agreed that there were still a large number of Romanian Jews who wanted to leave the country for Palestine. In several cases they explained that these Jews would be awaiting the increased legal immigration quota, which they hoped for as a result of partition. They thought, therefore, that there would not be any more large illegal shipments, at least for the next month, and they believe that their communist government will grant them exit visas to correspond with their certificates after May. Conclusions. 30. The following conclusions may be drawn from the above evidence. That if any large guerrilla groups of communists exist among the Russian speakers of this shipment, they are either still on board or else have arrived unarmed and without documents. B. That the movements, planning, and administration of the final evacuation from Burgas, at short notice, was well and thoroughly carried out. C. That the Moscow-controlled communist government of Romania intended at all costs to evacuate this shipment of Jews, and came to an agreement with Bulgaria to use a Bulgarian port for this purpose after the delay at Constanza due, probably, to British representations. The abdication of King Michael at this juncture may well be not coincidental. Famagusta, Cyprus. Detachment. January 2, 48. Actually, only 5 young men were taken off the boat by British intelligence agents. All the remainder of the passengers were taken directly to the camps, where no subsequent searches or interrogations took place. The 5 young men were interrogated by a member of the Palestine Criminal Investigation Department, who had been sent to Cyprus in order to conduct the investigation. He told them outright that he was concerned only with information about Soviet activities in Bulgaria and Romania, with particular reference to Soviet ship movements in the Black Sea and Soviet troop movements in Romania and Bulgaria. When the questions failed to elicit any information, the 5 immigrants were slapped and kicked and finally returned blindfolded from the interrogation center to the camp under escort. There were no further interrogations of passengers. Page 35. 13. British dissipate Palestine's assets. On December 11, 1947, Arthur Creech Jones told the House of Commons, "We certainly did not wish to leave Palestine in disorder after the tremendous and costly contribution Britain has made in developing Palestine and discharging our responsibilities under the mandate. I can assure the House that we shall wind up our affairs in Palestine in a fair and reasonable manner and, I hope, with little suspicion and ill feeling about the arrangements we make. This is a promise honored only in the breach. The refusal of the mandatory power to permit the Palestine Commission to reach the country until May 1, 2 weeks before the scheduled termination of the mandate, was predicated on the intention, as the facts substantiate, to dismember the Palestine administration so as to have little or nothing to turn over to the Palestine Commission, and to take such action as would safeguard British interests after the end of the mandate. Today, virtually all departments in the Palestine government have ceased to function. The exceptions are those like the Palestine Broadcasting Service, the Attorney General's Office, and the Chief Secretariat, which serve the British primarily. Railway and port services collapsing. 1. Typical examples of collapsing public services are the railways and the port services, so that it appears unlikely that after May 1st any operating system will exist. Yet this did not come as a sudden development. Actually, the Chief Secretary had received a number of warnings concerning such an eventuality as early as December 17, 1947 from the manager of the railways, Mr. A. F. Kirby. On that date, Mr. Kirby wrote to Sir Henry Gurney as follows: "If there is to be no satisfactory transfer of function through the UN, I consider that a collapse of the services is likely to come about sometime before the termination of the mandate." In the same letter, he expressed his anxiety concerning the disposition of the property of the railroads. If there is to be no handing over, what will be done with all the rolling stock on various parts of the system? Who will take over the stations, buildings, valuable workshops, the permanent way, etc.? How will rolling stock on foreign railways be accounted for? What will happen to goods in transit, etc., etc.? There must obviously be some process of handing over, and an orderly handing over would take several weeks. The railways outside the Haifa enclave cannot well be operated separately, in that the main locomotive running shed, workshops, and operational and maintenance headquarters are in Haifa. Withdrawal into the enclave and the operation of the railway therein only for military evacuation purposes would entail the most effective frustration possible to a succeeding authority. This course would also cut off the supplies of bulk oil and other essential supplies which are now distributed by rail to the main centers of population. The closing down of the main workshops and other activities of the railway, following the termination of the mandate, would probably mean that the railway would not be able to operate again for a prolonged period. 3 days later, on December 20, 1947, Mr. Kirby again wrote to the Chief Secretary, this time about the port situation, declaring, "There is nothing that this administration or the Director of Customs can do to ease the situation there. Pressure of financial interests is the only possibility of being effective in solving the present situation at Haifa port." Willing to isolate the Jews. The mandatory was willing to allow this breakdown on the assumption that Jewish need for